Okay. So it's on, it's streaming, very good. All right, so we'll go ahead and start a new project, okay? And we'll just call this, Canvas 1. All right, so what you need to do is to go to, it doesn't belong to, it belongs in drawing and animation. So when you go here, you will see only 3 things, okay? It's like, oh, really? This is all we can do? Well, in fact, there's only one thing that you can do first, is the ball and the sprite can only live inside the canvas. So you have to start with a canvas, okay? So you drag a canvas in, okay? And you make it as big as you can, okay? So you make the height, let's say, fill parent, which is as tall as you can get. And then the width is also fill parent, which is as wide as you can get. And then when you look at your viewer, it's like, what can we do with this canvas? I mean, it doesn't look like it's very useful. So on top of this, you can also specify sprites and stuff like that. But let's not even go there yet, okay? Let's just figure out what we can do without a ball as a sprite and without an image sprite as a sprite. How many people know what a sprite is in computer science? Yes? It's basically a bitmap that can automatically go in a certain direction by itself.
What they would make like Pong would be the
Yep.
ball or the paddle.
Exactly. So that's what a sprite is, okay? But let's not even go there, okay? So what we want to do is really just go to blocks and click on Canvas 1 and see what we can do with the canvas. And you can see, with the thumbnail that, oh, there's a lot of stuff we can do with a canvas. So we'll go through these things one by one, okay, just so that we understand the capacity or the capability of a canvas. The first one is dragged, D-R-A-G-G-E-D, dragged. So this one, you do need a sprite first, okay? So if you have a sprite on the screen, you can drag the sprite by pushing your finger on the sprite, and then without lifting your finger, just move around, in the canvas. That's a drag motion. So if you do something like that, every time the sprite changes location or as quickly as possible, it will create an event like this, which will show you the original start XY location, which is where you first touch the sprite. Okay, that's your start location. It will tell you a previous location, which depends a lot on how fast it can refresh, but it does give you a historical data like, oh, you were over there, but now you are here, which is the current XY. And it's telling you that. It is passing the information back to this particular event handler. So you can now specify in the event handler, you can actually make use of these numbers if you need to, okay? Typically, most people do not need to know the start XY, okay, but they do want to know at least the current, and most of the time they want to use the previous as well, okay, to animate, oh, the sprite is not going from here to here. Drag any sprite is basically the sprite itself, so it can actually identify which sprite are we talking about, because you can have multiple sprites in the same canvas. So the last parameter allows you to know which sprite are we talking about. Are we okay with this? I can demonstrate it later, okay? But this basically allows you, yeah, go ahead.
This doesn't apply to three-dimensional stuff.
Not three-dimensional. This is only two-dimensional. It's only two-dimensional because we only got XY as coordinates. If you want to make it like a 3D aware, you will have to add your own logic to do it. But potentially it can be done. Yep. This reminds me, remember those 3D glasses here where one side is red and one side is blue? You can make your own 3D hologram if you want to. If you understand all the projection thing, that's what you can do. Because you can draw lines. You can draw lines in red, draw lines in blue, and draw lines in white. Okay? Against a black, background. Okay? So you can actually do your own stuff. The second one is Fling, okay, which is basically, you just do a motion like that on inside the canvas, okay, and it will tell you where it starts, what is the speed of the fling, what is the direction, which is an angle of the fling, the speed separated into x and y coordinates, and then what sprite you're flinging. So once again, it only applies to a sprite. So it's different from a drag, which means you're not so concerned about the current location. You're only concerned about which way you're throwing something. Okay. The third one is touch down, which basically means your finger is touching the canvas. Touch up, you just lift your finger. Okay, it's no longer in contact with the canvas. And the last one is touched, which is generated as long as your hand is touching somewhere on the canvas. The last parameter, which is touched any sprite, is if your hand actually touches a sprite, then it would be true, so that you know that your hand lands on a sprite. Okay. So that means you can basically move your hand around and do nothing, but until it touches a sprite, then your hand will be dragging that sprite around. So you can do something like that. Well, talk is cheap. Let's do it, right? So what we'll do is we're going to make something like that. So we'll have a sprite that is going to be appearing at a random location, okay? And I will have my hand to keep moving around, doing until it touches a sprite. But once it touches a sprite, then it will be dragging the sprite around and leave behind a trail of something, so I can actually, so I can use it for drawing purposes. Are we good with that concept? Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so as we talked about, when we talked about this stuff here, we'll need a sprite, and this time I'll just make a ball sprite. So a ball sprite, as the name implies, is just a little ball. Okay, it's a circle in 2 dimensions. And you have some controls over any sprites. You can say whether it's enabled or not. You can specify the heading. So this heading part is using a 360-degree coordinate system instead of the 2 pi for full rotation. So 0 means we're heading that way. 90 degrees is this way, 180 is this way, and then 270 is that way. Okay? Huh?
I wouldn't have guessed zeros that way.
Yeah. So in a math class, the circle goes counterclockwise. On a compass, it goes clockwise. In a compass, it goes 0 degrees, 90, 180, and then 270. I'm fairly sure this one is using the math type, but let's just double check.
Give it 90. Give it a number so we can see it.
Okay, so 0 degrees is going toward the right of the screen, so I was correct. 90 degrees is going top. So it's the same as a math class. So when you're in a math class, that's how they assign those numbers. But on the compass, it goes the opposite way. Okay, all right, so getting back to our picture here. You can change the color, okay? So your circle sprite only can have one single color, but you can choose what color you want it to have. You can do it, you can change it on the fly as your program is running, okay? But that's not my concern right now, so I'm just going to leave it as default. The radius is the number of pixels. So typically the virtual size of a screen is about 300 across the screen. So 5 is, it's small, but it's definitely still visible. Speed is 0. Now this part is kind of strange. Why do we have a speed when we're looking at something that's static? Well, that's the whole idea of a sprite. Yes?
So could we use this actually as like a color palette as well?
As a color palette. You can make a color palette out of it, sure, absolutely. Because you can actually look under a pixel and find out what color it is. So you can pre-create a color palette first and then use your sprite to select a color. Yes, absolutely.
Did you say what interval was?
Huh?
Did you say what interval was?
Interval? No, not yet.
Okay.
I forgot about that one. So interval is the time in milliseconds when you update the location of a sprite.
I thought. So that's why I was confused. So, I mean, isn't that almost the same thing as speed, depending on how you look at it?
They relate to each other. I believe speed is the actual number of pixels that are different between intervals. So those two combined, or when you multiply those two, that becomes the actual speed, the velocity. I mean, we can look up the documentation and double check on that. So we want to look up interval and also speed. So interval is the interval in milliseconds in which the sprite's location is updated. So basically, how often do we want to update the location? 100 milliseconds means it's going to be updated 10 times per second because there are 10 100 milliseconds in 1 second. And then speed is the speed at which the sprite moves. The sprite moves this many pixels every interval. So that's why, when I said it's not the multiplication, it's not the product, it's actually speed divided by interval. That becomes the actual, number of pixels per second that your sprite is going to move. Because interval is specified in time, okay? So you have to divide the speed, which is the number of pixels to move per interval, by the interval amount. That will give you the actual speed, which is the number of pixels that your sprite will move per second. Okay? All right. So, getting back to my property list here, we want it to be visible. The initial location is 7886. You can obviously change that. Okay? Z is kind of interesting. It's like, why do we have a Z? This is supposed to be two-dimensional. Why do we have a Z? Because we need to know which sprite is on top of which other one. So it's for ordering of the sprites. All of these can change at runtime. Okay? In other words, while your program is running, you can change X, Y, Z, visibility, speed, radius, and all of the other stuff. Okay? So I'm just picking these as initial values. So are we good so far with this? Okay? So let's go to blocks and actually do something with this. Okay? So we go to blocks. Yeah, go ahead.
If you have, I'm just thinking if you could take a small sprite that's not visible, you could in essence create, just make a bunch of them, you could create a z-axis in essence.
Not sure what you're...
So if you have, because you can track where your sprite is.
Yes.
Based off of where they are in order of the other sprites. So like just a small sprite that's not visible.
Uh-huh.
And you can tell, okay, this one's on top of this one.
Yeah.
This one's on top of that one.
Yes.
So you could in essence create a z-axis by doing that.
You can compare. Yeah. So you can compare and see, which... You always know the Z of a particular sprite, and they can change. It can be changed as well. Yep. So it's mostly only used for display purposes. It's like, if you have two sprites on top of each other, which one is actually displayed on top of which one? How should I paint the sprites? That's the question. Okay. All right, so switching back to the blocks, okay? So the first thing we need to do is to randomize the location, because otherwise this won't be very interesting. So we go to screen 1, and then we pick up initialize, and say, I want the sprite to go from, go to random location. So here's, how do we do the random location thing? If we don't want to do any functions or subroutines, it's going to be a little messy, but it can be done. So we go to a ball, okay, and then we look at the XY coordinate. So we have, we can set, we can call to move the ball, okay, or we can just set the XY location. There we go. So we can set the X location, and then we can also, Control D, I thought Control D would duplicate. Right click, okay, there we go, right click, duplicate. So we can control the X and the Y, okay, so one is here, and one is here. Now we have to find out how wide is the screen, okay, or how wide is the canvas, because that's kind of the limit of how far we can go. But before we do that, we also have to use a random number generator, and it's under math. And we just look up, it's here somewhere. Random integer, okay, that's what we need. And we'll go from 1 to, okay, the end of this is based on the size of the canvas. So when we go to the canvas, and we look up the width of the canvas, which is down here, all the way to the bottom, almost. I know the math is slightly wrong, here, but it's close enough for what we want to do. So I'm just going to be, because if you set it to exact width, that means the when you refer to the coordinate of a ball,
the center of the ball.
Is not the center. That's the problem.
Oh.
It is actually referring to the upper left corner of the ball.
So the ball will be upper.
So the ball may not be visible.
That's so weird. Upper left corner around the object.
Well, they do the same thing with both ball and image sprites.
It's like King's Quest back in the day where you got that little yellow dot.
Oh,
Remember that game?
nope. But I think I know what you're talking about.
Old Sierra games.
Okay.
Like, it was all like bouncing and you would grab items and it was always the upper left-hand corner was a yellow dot.
Okay. All right. So at this point, I would have this the sprite initialized, and now we can move on to doing some other stuff. I need to charge this phone. Yep, has not been used over the whole weekend, so I'll let it charge a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to track my finger movement until it picks up a sprite. So my initial touch may not be touching a sprite at all, so nothing should happen because I'm not at the sprite yet. So we go to canvas again, and then we just use touched as an event handler. And as long as no sprite is touched, I'm not going to do a single thing. So we go to touched.
Right now you have something that when you first open your app, it's going to put the dot somewhere randomly.
Right.
Okay.
So now we have an event handler that captures all the events, as my finger is moved over the screen. But it's not going to, it will also tell me whether I am touching any sprites, okay? I only got one sprite, of the entire app at this point, so it's going to be that sprite. So the first thing we can do is now to say, use a conditional statement, go to control, and then we use a if then else. Oh, we need a We'll use it later, so we'll just move this aside, and then over here we'll say if I did touch any sprites, okay, then I'll potentially do something. Okay. Now touched any sprites is a Boolean, which means it's either only true or false. Okay, it's not going to tell me which sprite I have touched. It would just say that, yep, you touch a sprite. And then we go back to Canvas. And then this time we go here to understand this a little bit better. Okay, when the user does a drag from one point to another point, the pair indicates whether a sprite is being dragged. Okay, so if I initially do not touch a sprite, the drag is going to say, drag any sprite is going to be false the whole time, which is not going to be helpful. So I'm just going to have to do all the logic here. Now, if I do touch any sprites, I need to move that sprite, okay, as the sprite is, as the touch motion is continuing.
If you touch a sprite, you have to move it?
Because the whole idea is I can move my hand on the screen in the canvas. Nothing would happen until I touch a sprite.
Yeah.
But as soon as I touch a sprite, the sprite should follow my finger.
Okay.
So I want that effect.
It's not a rule of the...
No, it is not a rule.
That's what we want to do. Okay.
That's what we want to do. So the one thing we can do here that's easy to do is to set a variable. Okay? So the way we do this, to set a variable is to use a global. This time we need a global variable because we need to remember whether we have touched something or not. Okay? Sprite, S-P-R-I-T-E, Sprite. Okay, Sprite touched. And we can set the initial value to false. There we go. So what I just did was to click on a block that has an empty notch, press the space bar, and then type what I want. So that can make things a little bit faster. Sure. Let me, okay, there's another place I need to do something like this. So let me show you how to do that. Okay. So we have an else here. So this else, I'm going to do the same thing. So I will go to variables and say set something to a particular value. So I'll set the global variable sprite touched. Okay, so this is how I do it. Okay, observe. Click on the block that contains a notch where you want to fill, like that. Press the space key, so it will give you that little box at the upper right hand corner, and then type what you want.
I always thought it was a mistake.
Oh.
Like a graphics error that they don't. So I always escape out of it.
Okay. And then press the enter key, and that will give you the block. Okay. So obviously with the other one, we will say the opposite. Okay. So we'll duplicate this block and put it over here, and set this one to true, like so. All right. So this is only for touched. So when we are not touching anymore, we definitely need to turn it to false again, just to be sure. Okay, so touch up is going to have its own thing to do, which is just turning it to false. Touch down doesn't have anything to do because when I touch down, I may not be touching a sprite. Okay. All right. So in addition to this, we now have something to do, because if I have been touching something, touching a sprite, I also need to know whether it's touched already before I get into this conditional statement, because if it's already touched, I just need to track it. Okay, so that means I need another conditional statement. Well, I could do it without another conditional statement, but let's just do it with another conditional statement. And we basically now say if not and then space sprite touched, then we do the following. This part is not going to be helpful, but it's okay. It's okay to have it in here. It's just not very useful. Then we put an else here. So what do you think this else is going to corresponding to? The first part here is to say if the global variable sprite touch is not true, then we do this stuff here. Okay, which basically start latching onto the sprite. So when we get to the else part, I don't know whether we want the else part. I don't think we want the else part here. So I'm going to fix this code. Get rid of the else. We need a second conditional statement after this. So the second conditional statement is to say what if a sprite is touched? Then we want to move the sprite to my current XY location. Okay, so I'm gonna.
This is like how you games, like the level of
Games.
to move a dot, like how much.
Yep. So this one is just saying if sprite touched, then I want to move the sprite to my current location. So I just go to ball and I say move to XY, and that XY is the XY of this event. So I just drag this X to the new X location, and then I drag this Y to the new Y location. Alright, so I
Scroll up a bit.
scroll up.
So when you touch canvas, if not, I don't get that.
So it's the global variable sprite touched is automatically going to be false. So no matter what, you should go into that first if statement. That's true. This would be not false, which is true. And then once you
So that's
touch
not
it,
false?
yeah, that's not false because global sprite touched starts out as false.
So
Oh,
not
so
false is
so
true.
If it's not false,
Which
which
ends
is
up being
true.
It goes into that first conditional
Okay.
statement until you touch. And once you touch it, that's when it breaks out of that conditional statement and goes down. And then as
That's
soon
what
as-
that first one is checking for. It.
Yeah.
Basically waiting for it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, then it drops you into the second one, which is moving, but we haven't figured out where yet. We just put get XY, but we don't know where XY is, right?
XY is where you touched. That's where your finger is.
It is just because it's there?
Yeah, because it's just when you're touching the canvas.
Because
It's registering. Okay.
Yep. Now, when you look at a sprite, it has its own bunch of event handlers. It has its own touched, touchdown, and so on. So we are not even using these.
The little, yeah, I just get a little confused. The little boxes, I don't know what to call them. XY, touch any sprite. Those are like, what do you call those?
You mean these? It's a parameter.
And they're giving you information
Yes. The event is giving you information.
on all the parameters on anything in that list of the colors, like on any block. Whenever you have those little red boxes, parameters
Yes.
on anything, they basically.
Yes. Some event handlers do not have boxes like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like initialize does not give you a box, but this one does. So it depends on the kind of event.
But it's never anything you set.
No. It is not anything that you set. It is something that relates to the event itself. So when you say initialize, the event itself doesn't have a whole lot to tell you, right? It's just that, okay, this screen just started. But when you have an event like touched, you might want to know, what is the location where you touch the screen inside the canvas. So that's why certain type of event handlers give you parameters to give you extra information, and others do not. All right, so let's go ahead and build the app and give it a spin. And once we get to image sprites, you guys can do a lot of fun stuff with it because you can use any image. Any image.
All over 18, right?
If you publish your app, you will have to indicate whether it has adult content.
I mean, that would make sense.
It's not like it's illegal. It's just that you have to make it clear.
No one under the age of 18 should view this.
Exactly.
And all the kids will view it just because you have that
It
one
is
false.
Dungeons and Dragons. People get creative.
Well, if you're not creative, you wouldn't be playing that game to begin with. If you're not imaginative, right?
Find people to play it.
Okay, so need to go back to a command line, which is off the screen somewhere. Okay, that's okay. We can drag it back here. move back here. There we go. All right, so we go back to my Android SDK platform tools, and then the other screen needs to show me what is on the device. There we go. And then this one needs to upload it. So adb install -r, and this is canvas 1. There we go. All right, so we got it installed. Canvas 1. There we go. All right, so I'm touching the screen with my finger right now, not touching the sprite, and nothing happens. So I'm going to pick up the ball now, and still nothing happens. Okay, so it's not working the way it's supposed to.
It looks weird on the screen. Like, looks like your whole thing is frozen, or it's in the background. I mean, something's wrong. That your terminal is partly in front of your screen, right?
My terminal. Okay, there we go.
Sorry.
Looks better.
Well, I just thought maybe you crashed. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's not picking up the sprite. Okay, so if it's not picking up the sprite,
You have to go to the upper left corner of it, right? You told me to do, right?
Well, okay, so how do we debug something like this, right? My finger, where's my finger? That's the question.
Put a label and that shows what position your finger is.
Well,
and what position the sprite is in.
Well, let's check out what a canvas can do. So we'll check out what a canvas can do. And it can do a lot of fun stuff. You can draw stuff. See, you can draw circles, draw a point, and so on and so forth. So we are just going to draw a point, okay? This is only for debugging purposes. It's not really for anything other than debugging. So it's going to draw a point where the X is and where the Y is. I probably need to pick a color first. So, all right. So with the canvas, you can also set your current color, and so let's see, where is that? Get pixel color, save as, set background pixel color. Okay. Paint color. There we go. So we have to set a paint color for the dot that I'm drawing. Okay. And I don't really need to do it again and again, but that's okay. And let's pick some color that's obvious. Okay, blue is good. Okay, do another app here, because I need to know whether where I'm touching is actually at least within where the ball is. So that's good for debugging. Okay. Oop. I jumped the gun. I repeated the command before the file was saved, so I have to do it again. Go back here, and then go to canvas 1 again. So this time, it's not registering the touch, because it's not drawing any points whatsoever on the screen. Nope, it is. I can see tiny little dots.
Where?
But the
Oh, it's inside the little ball.
like these dots.
Oh, I thought it was a screen.
But it's not being drawn when my hand is sliding on the screen.
Maybe.
So the event is not.
If your interval is too long, it's only going to look.
There's no interval involved, because this is the touched event. When the user touches the canvas and then immediately lifts. Oh, okay, I forgot to read the second part.
It's touch.
Yep.
It's not drag.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So that's why you have a bunch of dots.
Yeah, that's what they need to do. So,
See, that's the downside of this version. You can't just easily change that to something.
well, it's
You just have to grab the top.
yep, just
Yeah, it drags everything right with it. Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that.
but dragging and copying is not quite as easy as text. Okay, drag any sprite. Okay, so drag any sprite is Boolean, indicates whether a sprite is being dragged. Okay, so we just need to change this to drag any sprite.
4 more warnings.
Yeah, because current x, current y, not just xy. Current x, current y, current
And you have to get touch.
x, current y. Yeah, I think that fixes everything. Yep, I think that should fix everything. All right, cool. So this time is a user programmer error. I did not read the documentation carefully because it says touched and then lift, right? But that's why the blue dots are useful, because I should be seeing a trail of blue dots, but instead it's like I find one here and find one here. Why is that?
Tiny and faded too.
Well, they're tiny because those dots have no thickness, so they're supposed to be single pixel.
Can you make the dots red so it really stands out?
Yeah, you can make them red.
When you drag it, if it works, it should
Yep.
seeable is still not a word. Should be visible. Why did I say seeable?
Yeah, means the same thing.
Thank you.
It's understood.
Way not to tear me down.
Okay, so do you see all a series of dots now? Oh, okay. It's not a psychic projector.
Oh, okay.
Do you see it?
Dots.
Okay, so now when I touch the sprite, it's moving the sprite now. Whee!
Oh, so those drawing programs they have, that's what they use.
Yep. All right. Isn't that kind of cool? So you can write simple games using this approach. So what kind of a game can you write using this?
Well, you can easily do Pokemon, like the old version of Pokemon.
Pokemon Go?
No, I'm talking about the original, like gold and silver and blue.
Oh, yes, you can definitely do those. Yes.
You can do King's Quest, Heroes Quest.
Now,
Quest.
Now, if you want to do the old Pokemon game, where it's all based on stats and whatnot, you want to put all the data on a web server. Okay, so every time your game starts, it checks on the web server. The first thing it checks is when is the web server last updated. If the last update is no later than your local version, then you don't have to waste the bandwidth to re-download everything. But on the other hand, if the remote version is updated, then you can initiate a download, so you can store everything, all the new characters, in your own TinyDB locally. So that will be the first thing you do. The second thing you need to do they actually use a touch motion with those games?
No, but
Because Game Boys don't even have touch. Gamepad.
Type thing, so
Yeah.
You could easily make that a touch.
You can make your own D-pad too. Now, the problem with your own D-pad is the canvas is not a multi-touch device. In other words, it can only track one touch location at any particular time. So you cannot have a D-pad and the AB buttons at the same time. So you would have to implement the AB buttons outside of canvas using actual buttons, in the app itself. In that case, I think they can track both events happening inside the canvas and also the buttons. So you can have a multi-touch kind of thing. We can try that, but this gives you an idea of what you can do with. So since my hand is off now, so it's the new lines are tracking just my hand movement, but until I get to this location and drag the ball, and you can see now the ball itself is moving. You can also see how the dot is always at the upper left corner of the ball, because that's the actual quote-unquote location of the ball. If you want it to look right, then you have to kind of use your own math to make the dot appear at the center of the dot instead of at the upper right upper left corner of the dot, of the circle.
If you wanted the lines to be thicker.
Okay, there are two ways to do it. So one thing you can do is to make a thicker dot. The second thing is you can use a line. So you're connecting a location to the previous location. Because now that we have a drag event, I know the previous dot location. So I can just draw a line to connect those two dots. Okay, so there are definitely things we can improve. Okay, so let's go back to the code and say, okay, what if I want lines and not those scatter dots, right? So in that case, instead of using a draw point here, okay, yep, you want to draw a line instead. So that is a function of the canvas. So you go to canvas, and then you say draw line, okay, which requires the first and the second coordinate. So your second, which is x2, y2, it doesn't really matter. The order really does not matter. It's just that one pair has to reflect your current location, and then the other one has to reflect your previous location, which is captured by pref x and pref y. So go to pref 1, pref x, and then pref y. I could have typed this too, which is going to be possibly faster. So now we have a line being drawn instead of a dot being drawn. So we make the APK again. But the app is still kind of look really messy because it doesn't erase lines or the dots or segments that have been drawn.
Erase Sprite. We'll make our own paint application.
Well, the trick to do that, there are several ways to do it. One trick to do it is to make a list. You make a list, and then you just say, okay, we can only remember up to X many dots. As we exceed that amount, then we'll start to erase line segments based on the list. So you can do that. So it will have an interesting effect because what you will see is you will see the trailing part of the line disappearing, kind of like one of those old games, Tron. It's kind of like Tron, the game where the trail of the bike would start to disappear after a while. There's persistence, right? So you can change the persistence by increasing or decreasing the size of the list. All right. So you see how it's drawing a line now? Yeah. Kind of smooth too. I mean, it's not bad. So we can now say, when we touch the sprite, change the color of the line or something like that. I mean, there are certainly, like things that we can do with that. Cool?
Very cool.
All right. Well, wait until you see what we can do with image sprites. Okay, so we'll go take a look at an image sprite, which is basically a sprite, but it is an image. So we look at image sprite, and we go to the full documentation here. I know the characters are a little bit small, okay? So a sprite is something that is on the canvas, blah, 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 blah. To have an image sprite to move 10 pixels every 100 milliseconds, that's just the movement part. But what is really cool about the image sprite, okay, let me switch back to the design view here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and drag one into the application here. And you can see that it's kind of the same thing as a ball, okay? Because a ball, it used to be called a ball sprite, except they dropped the sprite after a while. So it has got a heading, a height. Oh, it doesn't have a radius, right? So it has a height and a width, and it has a picture and a rotation. So these two are new, okay? So what we can do with the picture is now we can draw something, okay? So I think I still got that thing that I did not too long ago, okay? So let me go back to Inkscape and get back that document, okay? Mind defrag, okay? So we'll go ahead and export this. So we'll say export PNG, and this gives me the export area. I want to export the entire page. It's roughly, okay. you can control the pixels, like how wide and how tall, so this is close enough. So now we can say, okay, let's export this as sprite.png. Okay, and then we click export, and now it should be exported. So now we switch back to the app, and over in media, okay, now this is actually a misnomer. You can actually upload regular text file. Doesn't have to be a sound or graphics file. You can upload any file, and any file that you upload to this particular area is accessible by your app. Okay, so I just upload that file. Okay, let's choose what was it again? Sprite. Yep, sprite.png. Click OK. So now the Sprite file is uploaded. So now I can go back to here and specify sprite.png. Okay. So you can see, I got the sprite here now. Okay. Now the good thing is I designed this sprite to be circular. So rotations would be kind of cool because no matter how you rotate it, it's still the same size, right? So you can now go to rotation, and you can do a preview just to understand what it does, right? So you go to picture rotates, okay? So the rotation can only be done. I think Helen would actually change that too. Let me give it a try. Nope, it doesn't change it. So you have to specify the rotation at runtime, okay? So let's just say that I want this to rotate, as, let's say this is my splash screen, okay? I want that thing to show up, okay? You can have a zoom effect by changing its, height and the width, to whatever amount you want. And I can also set it to rotate. Now, rotation is not part of what the sprite can do automatically. So this is something you have to go like, but how do I ask a sprite to do something every so often? Yep.
Now, when you rotate it, does it rotate on the axis based off of where just like the sprite, ball sprite was?
The
top left corner.
So the top right corner is not the center of rotation.
Okay.
The center of rotation would be the center of the sprite itself. Yep. All right. But we need a timing mechanism. Okay. So this is yet another thing that we haven't really experimented with. It's a timer. So we go to, I think it might be under sensor. Yep. So we drag a clock into the app, and the clock only has a few attributes. It has got timer interval, timer enabled, and timer always fires. Okay. Now you might say timer enabled and timer always fires. Aren't they the same thing? They're actually different things. So what you can do now is to look at the documentation. A clock is a really useful thing. Okay. So when you look into the attributes, let me see. First of all, you can get the current time, but you can also go to here. Timer always fires says it will fire even when application is not showing on screen if true. In other words, if you have two screens in your app, okay, and you click something or you do something, the second screen pops up, okay? If you set this to be true, timer always fires. Even when the second screen is on top of the first screen, the timer corresponding to the first screen will still fire.
So you could have a timer that
Track time.
For saving.
Yes, for tracking things, for saving, and stuff like that. The second one is timer enable, which is basically saying, okay, should I even use the timer, okay? Timer interval basically says, how many milliseconds should be between the timer firing itself. Okay, so if you set the third parameter, which is timer interval to 100, that means you will get 10 quote-unquote frames per second. Okay, but it's not precise. Okay, so do not depend on this for timing purposes. But you can use it for like crude animation. Okay, so I'm going to set this one to 100. Turn off, timer always fires, and then go to blocks, because I need to say something about what if the timer expires? What if the timer fires? What should I do? So we go to the timer or the clock here, and it only has one single event, which is corresponding to what happens when the timer fires. Come on, drag. There we go. Okay. And we just want to rotate, right? So now we go to the image sprite, and then we change its rotation. So we go to the properties. One of the properties is the rotation. And then we set this rotation, which is also 360 based. And we can set it to the modulus, okay? Because I just want to keep adding, so it's convenient to have a modulus operation here. Modulus means we are only using the remainder after a division. Oh. Okay, would it take remainder? Nope, does not like that.
I don't think it likes the math block at all.
Hmm.
It's probably a string or something goofy.
I will figure it out maybe next time. But the thing is, you can change the rotation. I have to find out what the type is. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's probably like wants a string of 8 or something. I've seen it happen before. Like I try to use a math block and it doesn't like it.
Is it looking for a radius?
No, this is rotation.
Try putting text.
If true, whether it rotates. Okay, this is just whether it rotates or not the amount of rotation.
Yeah.
So to set the rotation, I think it might be a call. Okay, so we'll look at move to XY, point in direction. There we go. I think point in direction or point towards is going to change its heading, that's it. So we'll just do a quick run here. Huh?
I think it'll rotate like this.
Yeah, but I haven't set the speed. So that part should be fine. We just want modulus. Come on. Okay. So we want modulo of sprite 1 heading. We want addition 2. Okay. Maybe we'll do it next time because I need to add and then mod it with 360, but that will make it rotate. Okay, so we'll get to this one next time. So is this giving you guys a little bit more ideas of what you can do with your own app? Okay. It can draw text too. I don't have enough time to show you what a canvas can do, but it can draw text, circles, rectangles, all kinds of shapes. So you can develop, in a way, your own GUI if you want to, using a canvas.